standing at the altar in a gown worth $15,000. I stared at the empty seats reserved for my parents. My phone buzzed, but it was not a blessing. It was a text from my father accusing me with 5 words. What did you do? That empty row was not an accident. It was the opening shot of a brutal war designed to erase my existence and bury their own financial crimes. My name is Harper Sterling, and today was supposed to be the culmination of my 29 years of perfect, obedient existence. I stood in the vestibule of the Silver Sands Resort in Newport, smoothing the French lace of a gown that cost $15,000. The air smelled of salt and expensive lilies. Everything was perfect, except for the one thing that mattered. The ceremony was scheduled to begin 30 minutes ago. I peeked through the crack in the heavy oak doors. The guests were shifting in their seats. I could hear the low hum of whispers, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. 200 of New York's elite were waiting, but the front row, the one draped in gold satin specifically for the Sterling family, was completely empty. It looked like a gap in a smile. I pulled my phone from the hidden pocket of my dress for the 10th time. I dialed my father, Richard. It went straight to voicemail. I dialed my mother, Sylvia, voicemail. I called my brother, Preston, voicemail. A cold, unnatural chill crawled up my spine. They were never late. Appearances were their religion. "Where are they?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Liam Ford appeared at my side. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, but his jaw was tight with tension. He was an architect, a man who built solid things with his hands, so different from the smoke and mirrors of my family's world. He took my cold hands in his. "Harper." "Hey, look at me," Liam said, his voice dropping to a soothing murmur. "There is probably an accident on the bridge. You know how traffic gets. We can wait." I wanted to believe him, but then I saw the wedding planner. She was standing near the entrance, clutching her clipboard against her chest. She was not checking her watch or barking orders at the caterers. She was looking at me, and in her eyes, I saw something that terrified me more than anger. I saw pity. My phone buzzed against my hip. I scrambled to unlock it, my finger slipping on the screen. It was a text from my father. "What did you do?" "The police are on their way." My breath hitched. I stared at the words, unable to comprehend them. I typed a frantic reply. "Dad, what are you talking about? Where are you?" The message failed to deliver. The little icon turned gray. "He had blocked me," Harper Liam asked, squeezing my hand. "You look like you are going to faint. What is it?" Before I could answer, the double doors to the ceremony hall swung open, but it was not my parents. 3 men walked in, their heavy boots thudding against the marble floor. 2 were uniformed police officers. The third was Mr. Henderson, the chief legal counsel for Zenith Holdings, my father's company. The whispers in the room stopped instantly. Henderson did not even look at me. He walked straight to the altar, stepped up to the podium, and took the microphone from the confused officiant. "Ladies and gentlemen," Henderson announced, his voice booming through the speakers, "I regret to inform you that this ceremony is effectively canceled. The Sterling family and Zenith Holdings have formally severed all ties with the bride. Harper Sterling, pending a federal investigation into gross embezzlement." The room erupted. Shockwaves rolled through the crowd. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me lightheaded. Embezzlement. I ran the family's charitable foundation. I approved grants for art schools and animal shelters. I did not even have access to the corporate accounts. That is a lie. I gasped, stepping out from the vestibule, my legs shaking. I didn't do anything. The 2 officers marched down the aisle toward me. Liam stepped in front of me, shielding me with his body. "Back off!" Liam shouted, his face flushing with anger. "You cannot just storm in here." "What is this about Ms. Sterling?" one of the officers said, ignoring Liam completely. "We have a warrant to freeze all your assets immediately. Your bank accounts have been locked. The Sterling family has withdrawn financial support for this event. You need to vacate the premises. Now." Henderson looked at me then. His eyes were cold, dead things behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Your parents are devastated. Harper," he said, loud enough for the guests to hear. "They cannot believe you would steal from the company that fed you to fund your lifestyle." I looked at the sea of faces. People I had known my whole life, business partners, socialites. Friends were holding up their phones. They were filming me. They were capturing the bride being evicted from her own wedding. The white dress felt heavy, like a costume for a play that had gone horribly wrong. "Liam," I choked out, grabbing his arm to keep from falling. I had walked into this resort an hour ago as a cherished daughter and a wealthy heiress. Now, I was being escorted out by police, penniless and homeless, while my father's lawyer stood at the altar and destroyed my name. The drive back to Manhattan was a blur of rain and silence. I still wore my wedding dress, though the hem was now gray with street grime. When we arrived at my building in Tribeca, the doorman, a man named George who I had tipped $500 every Christmas for 6 years, refused to open the glass doors. He stared at a point somewhere above my left shoulder, his face a mask of professional detachment. "I cannot let you up, Ms. Sterling," George said, his voice flat. "The electronic locks on the penthouse have been reset. Zenith Holdings has claimed the property. You are listed as a trespasser. George, please," I pleaded, pressing my hand against the cold glass. "My dog is up there. My medication. My whole life. I am sorry. If you do not leave." "I have to call the precinct," he replied, finally meeting my eyes with a look of genuine regret before turning his back. I checked my banking app again. A red banner flashed across the screen. Account frozen due to legal action. My credit cards were dead plastic. I did not have a dime to my name. I stood on the wet sidewalk in a gown worth more than most cars, yet I could not even buy a bottle of water. We ended up in Queens. Liam used his personal credit card to book a room at a place called the Galaxy Motel. The room smelled of stale smoke and lemon cleaner. The carpet was sticky. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, the layers of tulle and silk filling the small, dingy space. The contrast between the morning's sunlight at the resort and the flickering neon light outside this window broke something inside me. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed until my chest ached. After an hour, I tried to reach out. I texted my maid of honor. I messaged my friends from college. I emailed my contacts in the art world. The responses were brutal. "Do not contact me." One read, "How could you do that to your family?" Read another. They had already seen the press release. To them, I was a thief who had bitten the hand that fed her. I was radioactive. The door clicked open. Liam walked in, shaking rain from his hair. He carried 2 plastic bags from a discount store. He pulled out a pair of gray sweatpants, a simple cotton t-shirt, and 2 cups of instant noodles. "I am sorry it is not lobster," Liam said softly, kneeling in front of me to help me unbutton the intricate back of my dress. "I have nothing, Liam," I whispered, stepping out of the ruined gown. "They took everything. Why are you still here?" "You should go before they come for you, too." Liam stopped me. He held my face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away the mascara that stained my cheeks. "Hey, look at me," he commanded, gentle but firm. "I did not propose to a trust fund. I did not propose to Zenith Holdings. I married you. We will figure this out. Even if we have to live on noodles for a year." I pulled on the cheap clothes. They felt scratchy, but they were warm. As Liam went to boil water in the rusted kettle, I picked up my phone again and stared at that last text from my father. "What did you do?" I read it over and over. Why would he text that he knew exactly what was happening? He was the one doing it. Then it clicked. He was creating a paper trail. If this ever went to court, he could show that text as proof of his shock, proof that he was a blindsided father rather than a conspirator. My mind raced back to last week. I remembered sitting in the sunroom with my mother, Sylvia. She had been so sweet, pouring me tea, pushing a stack of documents across the glass table. Just standard prenuptial asset protection. Darling, she had said, smiling that perfect, practiced smile. Since Liam is not from our world, the board just needs to ensure the company assets are insulated. Sign here, and here, and here. I had signed them. I had not read a single page. I trusted her. I turned on the small television bolted to the wall. The financial news channel was on. The ticker at the bottom of the screen showed Zenith Holdings stock down 2%. The anchor was speaking in a grave tone. Zenith stock takes a slight hit amidst the embezzlement scandal involving the CEO's daughter. The reporter said, however, analysts say the swift action by Richard Sterling to cut ties has stabilized investor confidence. It was a cover. They needed a reason for the stock to dip so they could explain away a sell-off, or perhaps they were hiding losses that had existed for months. My phone pinged with a notification. It was not a text. It was an email from an anonymous address. The subject line was blank. Inside was a single audio file. My hands trembled as I pressed play. The sound was grainy, recorded perhaps from a phone in a pocket, but the voice was unmistakable. It was my brother, Preston. She signed it, the stupid cow. She didn't even look at the clauses. Preston's voice sneered through the tinny speaker. There was the clinking of ice in a glass. Tomorrow she will be the perfect scapegoat. Dad says we can pin the liquidity crisis entirely on her mismanagement of the charity fund. I froze. The recording ended. I looked at Liam, who was handing me a steaming cup of noodles. The despair that had been drowning me 5 minutes ago began to recede. In its place, a cold, hard knot of anger formed in my stomach. They thought I was weak. They thought I was just the pretty, airheaded daughter who planned galas and signed whatever was put in front of her. Eat, Liam said. You need strength. I took the cup. I did not cry anymore. I am not going to run. Liam, I said, my voice dropping an octave, sounding steady for the first time all day. They want me to disappear. They want me to be the villain. I took a bite of the noodles. They tasted like salt and preservatives, but right now, they were fuel. I am going to burn them down, I said, and I am going to take back every single cent they stole. We cannot just walk into the police station and scream that they are liars, I said, pacing the small space between the bed and the window of our motel room. They own the police. We need proof. Irrefutable, physical proof. Liam was sitting on the floor with his laptop open. He looked up, his eyes tired but focused. I might have something, Liam said. I still have the architectural schematics for the Zenith headquarters renovation I did 3 years ago. I know every vent, every server room, and every emergency exit in that building. Good. I nodded, my mind racing. Keep that safe. But I need digital footprints. I need to remember. Then it hit me. The storage unit. Years ago, when I briefly fancied myself a painter, I had rented a small, climate-controlled storage unit in Brooklyn to keep my canvases and supplies away from my mother's critical eyes. I had paid for the 10-year lease in cash using money I won from a horse race bet, just to have a secret that was mine alone. It was the only property in the world that did not have the name Sterling attached to it. Get the car, I told Liam. An hour later, we were standing amidst dust sheets and the smell of turpentine. I dug through a box of dried-up acrylics until my fingers brushed against cold metal. It was my old laptop, a bulky machine I had replaced 5 years ago but never threw away. We plugged it in. The screen flickered, then glowed white. I held my breath as the progress bar loaded. I did not need the current company files. I needed history. I needed to see where the rot began. I accessed the local backup of my emails from 5 years ago. I used to forward all the Sterling Hope Foundation monthly statements to this personal account because the company server was always crashing. "Look at this," I murmured, pointing at the screen. Liam leaned over my shoulder. "What am I looking at?" "These transfers," I said, tracing the lines on the spreadsheet. "Every month, there is a transfer of roughly $40,000 listed as consulting fees to a firm called Orion Consulting. I remember asking my father about them once. He told me not to worry my pretty little head about administrative costs. I typed Orion Consulting into the search bar. The results were sparse. No website, no LinkedIn profiles, just a registration address in Nevada. I pulled up the satellite view of the address. It was an empty lot of dirt in the middle of the desert. "It is a shell company," Liam said, his voice hardening. "Who is the registered agent Elias Vane?" I read the name out loud. I had never heard it before. I sat back on the dusty concrete floor, my mind connecting the dots with terrifying clarity. The transfers were small enough to go unnoticed in a multi-million-dollar charity, but over a decade, they added up to millions. But why blow up my wedding over a few $1,000,000? That was pocket change to Zenith Holdings. Unless... I paused. A sudden realization making me feel sick. The trust fund. I whispered. My grandmother left me a trust fund. $50 million. It was supposed to unlock fully when I turned 30. Or what Liam asked. Or when I got married, I finished, my voice shaking. The clause states that upon marriage, the trust must undergo a mandatory independent third-party audit to ensure the principal amount is transferred to the new joint marital estate. Liam stared at me, understanding dawning on his face. If we got married yesterday, the auditors would have come in this morning, and they would have found an empty vault, I said. Tears pricked my eyes, but they were tears of rage, not sadness. They are not protecting the company from me. They are broke, Liam. My parents are broke. They have been looting my inheritance to prop up Zenith's failing stock price and their own lavish parties. The wedding, it was a deadline. So they had to stop it, Liam said, clenching his fists. And they had to make you the criminal so they could invoke the morality clause in the trust to strip you of your rights. They abandoned me. For money, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. They didn't hate you because you were poor. They hated you because marrying you would expose them. I stood up, dusting off my jeans. The fear was gone. I knew exactly what I had to do. We need a witness, I said. Someone who knows where the bodies are buried. Someone who was pushed out before she could talk. Martha, Liam said. Martha. I agreed. The old accountant. She was fired last year for incompetence 2 weeks after she asked for a meeting with the board. If anyone has the paper trail to prove Orion Consulting is a fraud, it is her. She lives in New Jersey, Liam said, closing the laptop. I sent her a Christmas card last year. I know the address. Then let us go pay her a visit, I said. My parents want a war. I am going to give them one. Liam's old sedan rattled as we crossed the state line into New Jersey. It was nearly midnight when we pulled up to a small, weathered bungalow in a quiet cul-de-sac. This was where Martha, the former accountant who had known the Sterling finances better than anyone, was hiding. The house was dark, the curtains drawn tight against the world. I knocked on the door, softly at first, then harder. Martha, it is Harper. Please, open up. I called out. There was the sound of a chain sliding into place, and the door cracked open 2 inches. One fearful eye peered out at me. Go away. Harper, Martha whispered, her voice trembling. I signed the papers. I signed the NDA. They said they would take my pension. They said they would hurt me. Martha, look at me, I pleaded, stepping into the sliver of light from the porch lamp. They have already taken everything from me. I am wearing sweatpants I bought for $10. I have no home. I have no family left. You are the only one who knows the truth." She looked at me, really looked at me, seeing the dark circles under my eyes and the desperation in my posture. The fear in her eyes softened into pity. She undid the chain and ushered us inside. "I saw the news," Martha said, handing me a mug of hot tea. "I knew this day would come. I just didn't think they would be this cruel." "How did they do it?" "Martha," I asked. "The transfers? The signatures? I never signed those documents." Martha let out a bitter laugh. "Preston. He used some new software. AI, Photoshop. I do not understand the technicalities. But he took your signature from a birthday card you sent him 3 years ago and replicated it on hundreds of wire transfers. I tried to stop him. That is why they fired me." She walked over to a ceramic cookie jar in the kitchen, reached deep inside, and pulled out a small silver USB drive. "I kept this," she said, pressing the cold metal into my palm. "My insurance policy. These are the original scans of the ledger before Preston doctored them. It is not just embezzlement. Harper, it is worse." Liam plugged the drive into his laptop. We crowded around the screen. The numbers were staggering. But it was the names of the receiving entities that made my blood run cold. "These are not just shell companies," Liam said, his voice low and tight. "These are fronts for the Petrov Syndicate. Harper, your parents aren't just stealing from you. They are washing money for international arms dealers." Suddenly, the room was bathed in blinding white light. A heavy vehicle had pulled up onto the lawn, its headlights beaming directly through the front window. "Get down!" Liam shouted. I peeked over the windowsill. A black SUV idled on the grass. The back doors opened, and 2 men in dark suits stepped out. I saw the glint of something metallic in the driver's hand. "Out the back," Martha hissed, shoving us toward the kitchen door. "Go, run through the woods to the main road. Do not stop." We scrambled out the back door, the cold night air hitting my face like a slap. We sprinted into the dense line of trees just as I heard the front door of Martha's house being kicked in. Branches whipped against my face, tearing at my skin, but I did not feel the pain. I only felt the terror of being hunted. My parents were not just greedy socialites. They were criminals who had sent hitmen to silence a witness. We ran for what felt like an hour until we reached a gas station on the highway. We called a cab from a payphone, terrified to turn on our own cell phones. Back in the safety of the motel room, with the door bolted and a chair wedged under the handle, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. I opened the USB drive again, looking for anything else we could use. There was a folder labeled Personal, HS. "What is this?" I whispered. I opened the file. It was a scanned copy of a birth certificate from 29 years ago, but the names were wrong. The mother listed was not Sylvia Sterling. It was Clara Vance Sylvia's younger sister who had died of an overdose the year I was born. And underneath, a legal adoption decree. Oh my God. I gasped, the air leaving my lungs. "I am not their daughter." Liam pulled me close, reading the screen over my shoulder. "They adopted me," I said, my voice breaking. "Not because they wanted a child, but because Grandma left the trust fund to Clara's offspring. They needed me to access the money. I was never a daughter to them. Liam, I was just a key to a vault. The cruelty of it all finally made sense. The coldness, the distance, the ease with which they discarded me. I wasn't family. I was a business transaction that had finally expired." I looked into the cracked mirror of the motel bathroom, but Harper Sterling did not stare back. The woman in the reflection had jagged, jet-black hair cut short to her chin and wore thick-rimmed glasses that obscured her eyes. I zipped up the gray polyester jumpsuit I had bought from a uniform supply store. I looked exactly like what I needed to be invisible. "Are you ready?" Liam asked, handing me a plain white plastic keycard. I reprogrammed the frequency to match the night staff access codes. "It should get you into the service elevator and the executive suite, but you have to be fast. The encryption refreshes every hour." "I am ready," I said. taking the card. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I arrived at the Zenith Holdings Tower at 2 in the morning. The building rose 60 stories into the dark Manhattan sky, a monolith of glass and steel that I used to think of as my legacy. Now, it was just a fortress I had to breach. I walked past the front security desk, head bowed, pushing a cleaning cart, the night guard. A man I had waved to 1,000 times did not even look up from his tablet. To him, I was just part of the furniture. The service elevator ride to the 55th floor felt endless. When the doors slid open, the silence of the executive floor was deafening. I stepped out, the wheels of my cart squeaking softly on the marble. I made my way toward the CEO's office, but suddenly, the heavy thud of boots echoed from the hallway to my left. Did you hear? That a voice grumbled. It was the private security detail. I panicked. I scanned the corridor and saw the door to the main server room. I swiped the card. The light blinked green. I slipped inside and let the door click shut just as the beam of a flashlight swept across the spot where I had been standing. For 20 minutes, I huddled in the cramped space. It was sweltering. The air temperature kept high by the humming racks of servers. I crouched between the blinking lights, sweat trickling down my spine, listening to the guards chat about a baseball game just outside the door. I think it was just the AC unit settling. One of them finally said. When their footsteps faded, I slipped out and sprinted to the double mahogany doors at the end of the hall, my father's office. I did not go to the heavy steel safe in the corner. That was a decoy. I knew Richard Sterling better than he knew himself. I walked straight to the massive oil painting of our family hanging behind his desk, the one where we all looked happy, bathed in golden light. I gripped the frame and swung it outward. Behind it sat a small, digital wall safe. I typed in the code. It was not a birthday or an anniversary. It was the closing price of Zenith stock on the day the company went public. The door popped open. I grabbed the stack of papers inside. My hands shook as I rifled through them. There it was, the original trust agreement with my grandmother's wet ink signature, explicitly naming the biological issue of Clara Vance as the beneficiary. But beneath it lay something far more sinister. There were letters, crumpled and smoothed out again. Pay us what you owe, Richard, or we take a finger. The Russians are losing patience. And at the very bottom, a printed email between my father and a mechanic. The subject line read, Contingency Plan B. If the wedding is not stopped legally, I read the words aloud, my voice trembling with horror. Arrange for brake failure on the limousine. Make it look like a tragedy. They were not just going to ruin me. They were prepared to kill me. I pulled the USB drive Liam had given me from my pocket and jammed it into my father's desktop computer. I installed the keylogger software in seconds, then initiated a full copy of his hard drive. The progress bar crawled forward. 90%. 95. Done. I shoved the papers into my trash bag, covered them with shredded paper, and turned to leave. The elevator dinged. I froze. The doors opened, and my brother, Preston, stumbled out. He was draped over the shoulder of a giggling woman in a sequined dress, reeking of expensive scotch. He stopped, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me. I gripped the handle of my mop, my knuckles turning white. If he recognized me, it was over. Hey, Preston barked, snapping his fingers at me. You, maid, clean up the mess in the conference room later. Someone spilled wine. I hunched my shoulders, keeping my face turned toward the floor. Yes, sir, I mumbled, altering my voice to a rasp. Useless people, he muttered to the girl, laughing as he dragged her toward his office. Hard to get good help these days. I waited until his door slammed shut before I bolted for the service elevator. As I stepped out into the cool night air 3 minutes later, I clutched the trash bag to my chest. I had the gun, the bullets, and the motive. Now, I just needed to build the stage for their execution. The glow of the laptop screen was the only light in our dingy motel room, casting long, distorted shadows against the peeling wallpaper. I had spent the last 3 hours reading, and with every click of the mouse, the image of the woman I called Mother disintegrated, replaced by a monster. We had assumed Richard was the villain. He was the CEO, the face of Zenith Holdings. But the data from the keylogger told a different story. Richard was just a puppet. The strings were held tightly in the manicured hands of Sylvia Sterling. "It is her," I whispered, the realization making my stomach churn. "It has always been her. Liam. Richard is terrified of her." I opened a folder labeled Medical History. It was not a record of my allergies or vaccinations. It was a correspondence between Sylvia and a private psychiatrist I had never met. "She is building a case to have me committed," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. "Look at this email. She is asking him to draft a diagnosis of severe paranoid delusions and borderline personality disorder. She wants to prove I am mentally unfit so the court will grant her permanent conservatorship over the trust. She wants to lock you away," Liam said, his jaw tightening as he read over my shoulder. "She does not just want the money. She wants to erase you completely." But the knife twisted deeper. I found her private chat logs with her inner circle of socialites. I forced myself to read them, to drink in the poison. "The investment is finally maturing," Sylvia had written on the day of my rehearsal dinner. 29 years of pretending to care about that failure sister's bastard child. I deserve a medal for my acting skills. I closed my eyes. Every hug, every bedtime story, every tear she had wiped from my cheek, it was all a performance. I was not a daughter to her. I was a long-term bond she was waiting to cash in. The grief I felt was not for the loss of a mother, but for the death of the illusion I had built my life around. "Are you okay?" Liam asked, placing a hand on my shoulder. I opened my eyes. The tears were gone. "I am done being sad," I said, my voice cold and hard. "She thinks she is the director of this play. Fine. I am going to rewrite the ending." We looked at the Zenith Holdings calendar. The 50th anniversary gala was scheduled for tomorrow night at the Grand Ballroom. It was the event of the season. They planned to introduce Preston as the new CEO and announce the tragic but necessary removal of Harper Sterling from the family trust. "We need a way to broadcast the truth," I said. "I need Elias Thorne." Elias was an investigative journalist who had come close to exposing Zenith's money laundering 5 years ago. Sylvia had sued him into bankruptcy and destroyed his reputation. I found his number and dialed. He answered on the second ring, and when I told him who I was, he did not hang up. He listened. While I coordinated with Elias, Liam spread out the blueprints of the grand ballroom on the bed. "Here," Liam said, pointing to a ventilation shaft near the stage. "There is a blind spot in the camera coverage here. And the audio system, it is an older analog setup wired through a central mixing board in the basement. If I can patch into that, I can override every microphone in the room." "Perfect," I said. "But I need to make her sloppy. I need her to panic." I had Liam courier a small package to the penthouse. It contained no note, just a cheap costume jewelry replica of the sapphire necklace my biological mother, Clara, was wearing in the photo I had found. 2 hours later, the keylogger on my screen flashed red. The microphone in Sylvia's office had activated. I put on my headphones and signaled Liam to listen. "It is her. It has to be." Her Sylvia's voice shrieked through the speakers, devoid of its usual polished calm. "Calm down. Sylvia," Richard's voice mumbled in the background. "It is just a necklace." "Do not tell me to calm down," Sylvia screamed, the sound of glass shattering following her words. "She knows, Richard. She sent me Clara's necklace. We killed her mother for that money. We let her rot in that apartment. And I will not let the daughter take it back now. Make sure the security at the gala is doubled. If she shows her face, I want her dragged out in handcuffs. I hit the save button on the recording software. We got her, I said, looking at Liam. She just confessed to murder. We spent the last of Liam's savings, $1,200 in crumpled bills, on a dress that looked like a declaration of war. It was not white, and it was certainly not modest. It was a floor-length gown of crimson silk, sharp and structural, designed to draw every eye in the room. In the mirror, the frightened girl who had been kicked out of her own wedding was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked like she was ready to burn the city to the ground. It fits, Liam said, his voice quiet as he adjusted the strap on my shoulder. You look dangerous. That is the point, I replied, staring at my reflection. We were operating on a tight timeline. Elias, the investigative journalist, messaged me to confirm that his exposé was loaded into the publishing queue. He was just waiting for my signal to hit send. I had also forwarded the entire cache of financial documents to a contact at the FBI. I told them exactly when and where the Sterling family would be gathered together. They agreed to hold off on the raid until the gala was in full swing to ensure they caught the entire board of directors and the international money laundering contacts in one net. Liam sat at the small desk in our motel room, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He was finalizing a video file, a montage of damning evidence that he had embedded into a Trojan horse program. I have bypassed the firewall for the ballroom's audio-visual system, Liam said, closing his laptop. Once we plug this into the main console, we will have total control over the 60-foot LED screen behind the stage. But I needed one last thing. I needed the final nail in the coffin. I picked up my burner phone and dialed my father's private number. It rang 4 times before he picked up. Who is this? Richard's voice was gruff, impatient. I forced a sob into my voice, hunching my shoulders as if he could see me. Dad, please. It is me, I cried, letting my voice crack. I am so hungry. Liam left me. I have nowhere to go. Please, just tell me why you did this. If I know why, maybe I can accept it. There was a pause. I could hear the clinking of crystal in the background. He was already celebrating. You want to know why, Richard scoffed, his tone dripping with disdain. Because you are a leech. Harper, you have been a leech since the day we brought you home. You were never supposed to be anything more than a signature on a trust fund. But I loved you, I whispered, pressing the record button on the laptop. Love does not pay the debts I owe, he snapped. You should not have been born. Harper, I am just taking back what I spent raising you. Consider it a return on investment. He hung up. I stopped the recording. My hands were not shaking anymore. The sadness I had feigned evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. Got it, I said, saving the file and adding it to Liam's presentation. Let's go. An hour later, we were at the service entrance of the grand ballroom. We wore black tactical pants and polo shirts with the logo of the audio-visual company Liam had mocked up. With the stolen key cards and a heavy case of equipment, we walked right past the security checkpoint. They were looking for a frantic, disheveled ex-bride, not 2 focused technicians. We set up in the shadows of the tech booth, high above the ballroom floor. Below us, the gala was a sea of diamonds and tuxedos. I saw my mother, Sylvia, laughing with a senator, her hand resting on his arm. I saw Richard clinking glasses with the board members. They looked untouchable. They looked victorious. Ladies and gentlemen, a voice boomed over the speakers. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight hit the stage. My brother, Preston, walked out to thunderous applause. He looked smug, his chest puffed out. Thank you all for coming, Preston said, leaning into the microphone. Tonight marks a new chapter for Zenith Holdings. We have weathered a storm caused by unfortunate internal betrayals. My sister, Harper, has proven to be a disappointment to this family and a criminal to this company." The crowd murmured in agreement. I felt bile rise in my throat. "But we are stronger without her," Preston continued, raising his glass. "Tonight, we celebrate the future. A future where Zenith is unburdened by the past." Liam nudged me. He pointed to the master override switch on the console. It was time. I took a deep breath. I smoothed the skirt of my red dress, which I had hidden under my oversized technician's jacket. I unzipped the jacket and let it fall to the floor. The crimson silk caught the dim light of the booth. "Go," I whispered to Liam. I stepped out of the booth and began to descend the spiral staircase that led directly to the stage, walking out of the darkness and into the line of fire. Preston was mid-sentence, boasting about a quarterly profit that did not exist, when Liam killed the power. The grand ballroom was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. The polite applause died instantly, replaced by confused murmurs and the clinking of silverware against china. Then, a voice boomed through the speakers. It was not Preston's smooth, practiced baritone. It was shrill, manic, and terrifyingly familiar. "She is just a pawn. When she marries, we lose the money printer. We have to destroy her." The recording cut through the darkness like a knife. It was the conversation I had captured in Sylvia's office. "We kill the mother for the trust fund, and now we have to bury the daughter to keep it. Fine. Just make sure she looks like the criminal." "Not us." A collective gasp swept through the room. Suddenly, the spotlights snapped back on, but they were not focused on the podium where my brother stood frozen. They were focused on me. I stood at the center of the stage, the crimson silk of my dress blazing under the harsh lights. I held a microphone tightly in my hand, my knuckles white. I stared out at the sea of faces, the investors, the partners, the friends who had abandoned me 24 hours ago. They looked at me as if they were seeing a ghost. "Hello, Mother. Hello, Father," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Did you miss me?" Richard and Sylvia sat at the head table, their faces drained of all color. Sylvia dropped her champagne flute, and the sound of shattering glass echoed in the silent room. Preston was the first to react, his face twisted into a snarl of pure animal rage. "You!" he screamed, lunging across the stage toward me. "Cut the mic! Get her out of here!" He reached for me, his hands clawing at the air, but he never made contact. Liam, who had discarded his technician's disguise, sprinted from the wings and tackled my brother mid-stride. They crashed into the podium, sending the heavy wood structure toppling over. Liam pinned Preston to the ground, twisting his arm behind his back with practiced efficiency. "Stay down," Liam shouted, his voice echoing without a microphone. I did not flinch. I did not look down at the brawl. I kept my eyes locked on the crowd. Yesterday, I stood in a wedding dress waiting for parents who never came. I spoke clearly, letting every word land with impact. I was told I was a thief. I was told I was a disappointment. But the only crime I committed was trusting the people who share my last name. I pointed to the 60-foot LED screen behind me. Liam had triggered the program. The screen flooded with high-resolution scans of bank statements. "This is the Sterling Hope Foundation." I narrated as the numbers scrolled by. "And these are the monthly transfers to Orion Consulting, a shell company registered to a vacant lot in Nevada. $50 million over 10 years, stolen from a trust fund left to me by my grandmother." The crowd began to stand up, phones raised, recording everything. "And this," I continued as the image changed to the adoption decree, "is the reason why. I am not Richard and Sylvia's daughter. I am their niece. They adopted me after my mother died solely to access the money she left behind." "Lies," Sylvia shrieked, standing up and pointing a trembling finger at me. Her perfect composure had cracked, revealing the desperate, ugly woman beneath. "She is mentally unstable." It is a deep fake that creates fake videos. Do not listen to her. Is this a deep fake too? Sylvia, I asked, signaling for the final slide. The screen changed to a blown-up image of the text message Richard had sent me at the wedding. What did you do? The police are on their way. Next to it, I displayed the official call log from the Newport Police Department. My father sent this text at 10:30 in the morning, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that commanded total silence. But the police were not called until 11:15. How did you know the police were coming 45 minutes before they were called? Dad, unless you were the one who orchestrated the whole thing. The room erupted. The investors turned on the Sterlings, shouting questions, demanding answers. Richard slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. He looked small. He looked defeated. I walked to the edge of the stage and looked down at him. I did not steal a dime. Dad, I said, feeling a single tear trace a hot path down my cheek. I just wanted to be happy. I just wanted to be your daughter. And that was the one thing you could not allow. Richard looked up at me, his eyes hollow. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to beg, perhaps to lie again, but the sound was drowned out. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the night was lit up by a chaotic strobing of red and blue lights. The wail of sirens grew louder and louder, piercing the walls of the ballroom, signaling the end of the party and the end of the Sterling Empire. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom did not just open. They were rammed open. A dozen agents in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI swarmed into the room, their voices cutting through the lingering shock of the crowd. Federal agents, stay where you are. Nobody leave the building. The sound of chaos that followed was a symphony of justice I had waited a lifetime to hear. Richard, the man who had looked so imposing at the head of the table just minutes ago, crumbled. He did not stand tall. He did not fight. He pointed a shaking finger at his wife, his face pale and sweating under the stage lights. It was Sylvia. Richard shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. She planned it all. I just signed the papers. I was scared of her. She threatened me. Sylvia looked at him with pure disgust before turning her venom toward me. Two agents grabbed her arms, pulling her away from the table. She did not struggle physically, but her eyes burned with a hatred so intense it felt like physical heat. You ungrateful little wretch, Sylvia spat, saliva flying from her lips as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. I took you in. I gave you a life. And this is how you repay me. You are nothing without the Sterling name. Nothing I am free, I said simply, though she could not hear me over the din. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement near the kitchen swing doors. It was Preston. He was trying to slip away while the agents were focused on our parents. He looked like a rat scurrying from a sinking ship, shoving a waiter aside to get to the exit. But he did not make it far. An officer stepped out from behind a decorative pillar and slammed him against the wall. As they patted him down, the officer pulled a blue booklet from the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket, a passport. Going somewhere. Mr. Sterling, the officer asked loud enough for the nearby guests to hear, under the name. Elias Vane. That is a federal offense on top of the fraud. I watched them being cuffed. The metal clicked shut around Richard's wrists, then Sylvia's, then Preston's. I expected a surge of joy. I expected to feel like I was floating. Instead, I felt a heavy, quiet emptiness. The monsters were gone, but they had taken the illusion of my childhood with them. Around us, the room had turned into a media circus. Every guest was holding up a smartphone, live streaming the downfall of the Sterling dynasty. I could see the comments scrolling on a nearby screen. Justice for Harper. Zenith is finished. Sell everything. I glanced at a tablet on a deserted table. The stock ticker for Zenith Holdings was plummeting. It had already lost 60% of its value in 10 minutes. The empire built on lies was collapsing in real time. Liam squeezed my hand. His grip was warm and solid, the only real thing in a room full of artificiality. "It is over. Harper," he whispered. "You did it." Suddenly, the circle of space around us began to shrink. The same investors who had sneered at me yesterday, the same board members who had called me a thief, were now crowding in. Their faces were masks of feigned apology and desperate greed. "Harper, darling," a man I recognized as the CFO stammered, reaching out a hand. "We had no idea. We were deceived just like you. We must discuss a transition plan. You are the rightful heir to the trust. We can rebuild." I looked at his outstretched hand. I did not take it. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You were happy to destroy me when the stock price was high. You do not get to ask for salvation now that it is worthless." I turned to the chief of police, who was overseeing the arrests. I reached into my bag and pulled out the physical drive containing the original trust documents and the unaltered ledgers. "Chief," I said, handing him the drive, "here is everything. The money laundering, the fraud, the attempted murder. Do not let them buy their way out of this." "We won't, Ms. Sterling," the chief said, taking the evidence with a solemn nod. "This is airtight." As I turned to leave, I saw a familiar figure standing near the exit, half hidden by a velvet curtain. It was Martha. She was wearing her old coat, clutching her purse, but she was smiling. It was a sad smile, but it was free of fear. She nodded to me once, a silent acknowledgement that the debt had been paid. "Let's go home." "Liam," I said. We walked toward the exit, hand in hand. The cameras flashed, blinding and relentless, and the reporters shouted my name, begging for a quote, a soundbite, a reaction. I gave them nothing. I stepped out of the ballroom, leaving the wreckage of the Sterling family behind me, and walked into the cool, dark air of the night. The gavel struck the mahogany block with a sound that felt like a heavy door slamming shut forever. It had taken only 4 weeks for the justice system to process the mountain of evidence I had provided. The jury did not need long to deliberate. Richard, Sylvia, and Preston stood in their orange jumpsuits, stripped of their tailored suits and their arrogance. They were sentenced to 25 years each for grand larceny, fraud, and money laundering. As the bailiffs led them away, Sylvia turned to look at me one last time, her eyes wild and pleading, but I just looked through her, as if she were made of glass. I walked out of the courthouse and went straight to the Hall of Records. I filled out a single sheet of paper and paid a fee of $85. When I walked out, Harper Sterling was legally dead. I was Harper Vance. The next few months were a blur of dismantling the empire my adoptive parents had built on lies. I used my authority as the sole beneficiary of the trust to dissolve Zenith Holdings. I sold the headquarters, the yachts, and the vacation homes. I used every cent of the proceeds to pay severance to the employees who had lost their jobs and to reimburse the small investors who had been duped. With the remaining funds from my grandmother's trust, I did not buy a mansion. I started the Vance Foundation, a legal aid fund dedicated to helping young adults escape financial abuse and family manipulation. I moved out of the city. I bought a small 2-bedroom cottage in a quiet suburb of New Jersey. It was the house my biological mother, Clara, had rented before she died. It needed work, but that was perfect. Liam opened his own boutique architecture firm in the town square. He spent his days designing homes for real families, not tax shelters for billionaires. One rainy Tuesday, a letter arrived from the state penitentiary. The handwriting on the envelope was jagged, but I recognized the slant. It was from Sylvia. "You do not have to read it," Liam said, placing a mug of coffee on the table beside me. "I know," I replied. I did not open the envelope. I walked over to the fireplace and tossed it onto the dying embers. I watched the paper curl and blacken, the words turning to ash before they could ever hurt me again. I had cut the cord. Later that week, while we were renovating the floor in the master bedroom, Liam pried up a loose board near the window. Underneath, covered in 30 years of dust, was a small tin box. "Harper." "Look at this," Liam whispered. I opened the rusty lid. Inside, there were no jewels or bonds. There was a dried flower, a hospital bracelet with my birth date, and a photograph. It was a picture of a young woman with kind eyes holding a baby. She was laughing, looking down at the infant like she was the most precious thing in the universe. She loved me. I choked out, running my thumb over the glossy paper. She really loved me. For 29 years, I had chased the approval of people who saw me as a paycheck. But right here, under the floorboards of a humble cottage, I found the only validation I ever needed. We got married on a Tuesday afternoon, on a small strip of public beach near our new home. There were no hundreds of guests, no press, and no $15,000 dress. I wore a simple white sundress I found at a vintage shop. Liam wore a linen shirt and khaki pants. Our only guests were Martha and 2 friends from Liam's office. The ocean breeze tangled my hair as we exchanged rings. It was imperfect, messy, and absolutely wonderful. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, Liam pulled me close. "Do you ever think about what you lost?" Liam asked softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Do you regret that day at the resort I pulled out my phone?" I scrolled to the contact labeled Dad. I pressed delete, confirming that the number and the man were gone from my life forever. I looked up at my husband, smiling as I felt the warmth of the setting sun on my face. "No, Liam," I said, my voice steady and filled with peace. "I do not regret being abandoned. No, Joe. Et moi, Tim Dai Chin Min." Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Harper's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more listeners.